everyone, my name is Pranav Ananduja and I belong to Faculty of Law and Governance, and this session is in continuation with the last session. Last session we have discussed Hobson contract, and this session we will going to discuss Locke and the social contract. So Locke's life overlapped that of Hobbes, whereas Hobbes had experienced the particular turmoil of civil war and had propounded a theory based upon a model of absolutist rule. Locke was affected specifically by the events which culminated in the Glorious Revolution that has happened in 1688, ending the Stuart dynasty, and with it any lingering belief that the dynasty's claim to rule by divine right. Now Locke articulated a theory based upon subjects' individual and inalienable rights. He developed an individualistic interpretation of the social contract, which were based upon various principles. Now I am going to read a para of two treatises on government, wherein he says, to understand political power right, and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in, and that is a state of perfect freedom, wherein they can order their action and dispose of their possessions and person as they think fit, within the bounds of law of nature, without tasking leave or depending upon the will of any other man. So a state also of equality, wherein all the power and jurisdiction is reciprocal, no one having more than another, there being nothing more evident that the creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of the nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another without subordination or subjection. With this, dangers and inconveniences arose. Enjoyment of natural rights to liberty was curtailed. Disputes could not be settled equitably, and revenge prevailed. Men found it unnecessary to unite in one political society so as to preserve their lives, liberties, and estates. The unity thus created was built upon a pactum unionis. A further agreement, a pactum subjectionis, represented the giving of power to a government which would protect the individual. So the contract bestows no arbitrary powers upon the government, because nobody can transfer to another more power than he has in himself, and nobody has an absolute arbitrary power over himself or over any other. So the fiduciary nature of government resulting from the contract is important. Locke emphasizes that the political power is that power which every man living in and the state of nature has given into the hands of society, and therein to the governors whom the society hath set over itself, with this express or implied trust that it shall be employed for their good and the preservation of their property. Now, what could be the legal implications of Locke's doctrine? Now, Locke is perfectly clear as to the implications of his advocacy of government with limited powers. Government for him has no other end but preservation, and therefore can never have a right to destroy, enslave, or designedly to impoverish the subjects. The legal implication of this doctrine are far reaching. It is very important to enforce natural laws which is surrendered to body politic and nothing more. The enforcement of those laws demand from government the activities of an umpire, that is, a judge on earth, with the appropriate powers to determine controversies and redress injuries. Now, Lockean view on property. Because the great and the chief end of men's uniting and putting themselves under a contract is preservation of their property, and which obviously includes life, liberty and estates, no parts of men's property may be taken from him by a government without his consent. Now, what about equality? Locke proposed that where law ends, there tyranny begins. Now, Locke insists upon the ultimate right of the community to check unbridled power and to confine a government to areas of activities agreed with the people. With this, the popular resistance to a government may be justified only where there has been a long series of abuses and where the very lives, liberties and states of citizens are imperiled. Resistance does not necessitate acts of revenge. Its aims must be the restoration of the pattern of social order which has been disturbed or destroyed by an absolutist ruler. Disobedience and rebellion are difficult to justify when a government observes its pledge faithfully. Now, if you look at Locke's social contract, you will find that he is not like Hobbes. He does not give absolute power to the state. He talks about a society wherein a state's job is to do nothing but preserve the society and preserve the interest of men. And with this, he propounds the very essence of constitutionalism, the very essence of rule of law, the very essence of curtailment of absolute powers. Now, with this, we'll come to the last proponent of social contract, that is Rousseau. Now, Rousseau was a Swiss-French philosopher and political theorist whose writings were to have a significant impact on the doctrines of the French Revolution and was concerned with the problems of discovering the types of association which would have defended and protected the person and goods of each associate, and in which each, while uniting himself with all, may still obey himself alone and remains as free as before. He emphasized that the natural goodness inherent in human nature. Man is born good and innocent, free and equal, but he is everywhere in chains. Civilization is responsible for this state of affairs, and a return to the simplicity of nature is essential if man is to recover his freedom. Now, he wrote a book called Social Contract, wherein he says that each of us puts his person and all his power in command under the supreme direction of the general will. And in our corporate capacity, we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole. Now, the social order, according to Rousseau, is a sacred right which is the basis of all other rights. Now, Rousseau argues that in civil society, no individual is subject to another individual, and he is subject to general will. That is the will of the community. The sovereignty is therefore the exercise of society's general will. Because the sovereign is the resultant of those individuals who make up society, and he cannot have an interest which is in opposition to the interest of the individual. As a result of the social contract, which is the basis of the state, the general will is manifest in the majority vote of all individual citizens. Because people are good, they will cast their votes for measures which are good. The people are never corrupted, though they are often deceived, and it is only then that they apparently will what is evil. Now, sovereign power should rest with the people because of the importance of their will, which is inalienable. Although the people may delegate power to their elected official, this is very important. Although the people may delegate power to their elected official, they never surrender their right of sovereignty. Now, this, like Locke, is putting a restriction on the powers of the state. Rousseau talks about the respect element in law. Now, respect for the law, because it reflects the general will, is of much importance in Rousseau's scheme of government. Should a person disagree with a law emanating from people's institutionalized general will, the state may insist on his obedience. Such insistence embodies freedom, but does not violate it. In an important sense, therefore, the individual is forced by the state to be free. Freedom resides in forced obedience to law, which reflects the popular and sovereign general will. Now, if you look at the legacy of Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau's jurisprudence, they have been termed with a practical jurisprudence. Now, in which the agenda for discussion is set by the everyday problems of society. Hobbes had in mind a definite purpose: to assist in the avoidance of civil strife by providing ideological support to the authority of the state as vested in an absolute sovereign. Locke's purpose was clear: to invest individual members of the community with fundamental and inalienable rights. Now, Friedman suggests that Hobbes effectively destroyed all that was left of medieval components of law and authority. He has shaken himself free from medieval society and medieval ideas, and has thus completed the revolution of Renaissance. Locke's achievement is characterized by Friedman as having provided a theoretical framework for opposition of absolutism, which prepared the way for the planting of the seeds of parliamentary democracy. Rousseau proclaimed that as long as people is forced to obey and does obey, it does well, but as soon as it throws off its yoke, it does still better. If complete freedom is impossible and human behavior is to be partially controlled by government, then the legitimation of such a government demands a firm acknowledgement of men's right. Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau contributed to the growing concerns of legal theory with concepts of inalienable human rights and corresponding duties of governments to assist in the preservation and intensification of those rights. Contemporary Western jurists have no need of fiction of social contract upon Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau erected their theories of men's right in relation to state. But the need for a continuous assessment of the legal implications of government function and practices remains. This is where social contract theory ends. Thank you.